Hi everyone, this is Jason Burek of Wall Street from E Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from E Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest, but I've been following his work for a while now. He's put out some excellent articles on India with their demonetization scheme for a year or so now on The Acting Man, which is a libertarian Austrian school website. He's constantly traveling all over the world to look for investment opportunities, particularly in the natural resource sector. And he writes articles on culture, economics, investing, and junior mining. And he also has a yearly seminar in Vancouver titled Capitalism and Morality. Jayant Bhandari, thank you for joining me.
Jason, thank you very much for having me.
Now, Jayant, since you travel so much and I don't get to travel nearly as much as you do, I'd like your opinion on the emerging markets. Do you think the emerging markets are in trouble?
They are in huge trouble, Jason. There's only one emerging market actually, and that is China. The rest of the countries that are known as emerging markets are third world countries, and they were the third world countries and they will continue to be the third world countries. Economically, these countries have grown in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. But I go to most of these countries and sometimes several times a year. The problem is that despite economic progress, culturally and institutionally, these countries are getting degraded and now rather rapidly. And this is going to mean that these countries going forward will face huge and horrendous social, cultural, and political problems.
Now, there's been some articles that have come out about the emerging markets in the last month or so. I think there's record levels now of junk debt issued by emerging market private sector companies. But I've been saying for over a year now that I think the emerging markets, Giant, have borrowed way too much money in US dollars because, the Wall Street banks, the investment banks were offering them discounted loans in US dollars. And the US dollar has been stronger than a lot of other currencies, especially emerging market currencies. Do you think that's one of their main problems?
Well, getting free money from the US was beneficial to these third world countries for a while. But now, of course, these people have lived well. They have consumed the money supplied by America. Look at Africa, go to countries in Africa, and you will see that a lot of economic growth was backed by nothing else than consumption. They took on debt, Africans, and then they consumed that money that they got in debt. They are totally incapable of repaying that money back because they actually did not invest that money. So yes, now going forward, when demand for this money will come, they will not be able to pay back, and a lot of these companies and countries will start to suffer. For example, the country I grew up, India, a lot of companies there have huge debts, US dollar debts on their books. And also the stock market got a huge amount of investments from American and European institutions. But slowly and surely, this money will return back to Europe and America, and this will cause problems in India and other third world countries.
Yeah, there hasn't been a huge amount of defaults yet. So in terms of emerging market governments, in terms of emerging market private sector companies. So, I think it's just a question of when, not if at this point. Do you think another of the major problems in some of these other emerging market countries is corruption? Do you think that's one of the main problems there too?
Well, corruption is a way of life in those societies, and you can't really remove corruption from these third world countries because corruption, what you see from Western perspective as corruption is the way of life in these countries. So how can you ever remove corruption institutionally or in relationships between these people ever without having rational supervision of those societies? And those societies in the third world do not really have people and capabilities within their societies to have the right kind of skills and rulers to rule their countries, and democracy makes the whole situation impossible for them. So good people end up leaving for the US or to Europe, and that is why you get in the US some of the best people coming from the third world. Third world is left with unskilled people mostly to rule their countries.
Now, you've been covering a lot about India in terms of their demonetization scheme. I remember reading in your articles, Jayant, about how India has an emerging middle class, but a lot of the middle class is government bureaucrats, and you've been talking about how that hasn't really fixed any of the corruption. So you think then basically this is just cementing the corruption further? Is that what the demonetization scheme and some of these other programs in India have done with the central planning and government growing?
Demonetization and the change in taxes that they have implemented is going to continue to over centralize India. India does not need over centralization. This is a tribal country. These tribal countries should be aggressively decentralized. The more you centralize such countries, the more of tribalism will assert itself in the centralized government, which means eventually much more corruption and more destruction of the economy and more destruction of cultural values in the society.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. I was reading an investment newsletter from Real Vision. They put out a free newsletter every week to subscribers, and they're talking about how Indian banks are expecting another round of bailouts in the next month or two. And I think this is the third round of bailouts in just the last couple of years. I mean, it's getting kind of ridiculous with the bailouts. I mean, this just it feeds on itself with the amount of corruption. If they know that they're going to get a bailout and they just keep doing bad behavior, making bad loans, stealing money or stuff like that, it's just frustrating.
Well, bailouts are legalized corruption. You basically give free money to the banks. Banks do not really have to analyze companies that they give out loans to, and those companies get free money from banks, and these companies never have to return the money back to the banks. Now, this is a form of corruption, except that it is legalized, and Indian banks, as a result, are, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt. Government is forcing the normal guy on the street to keep his cash in the banks so that he helps these banks survive, but that is not the way you can generate wealth in the society. Eventually, this will destroy the economy.
Do you think then keep it with the demonetization scheme with this Aandar, which is a countrywide digital identification system that they're trying to put in place? This is leading to the government becoming more efficient at increasing taxes and layering on taxes then?
Not at all. The demonetization and forcing people to be going digital in terms of money means that their transaction costs have actually increased. I mean, these are people who are very uneducated. 300 million people of India live below the poverty line. That is equivalent to the population of the US. 50 to 70% of people of that country struggle to write their own names. The end result is that these people can have no understanding of how to use their ATM cards. Now, you are forcing these people to go into banking system. They don't really have the skills and capabilities to use the banking system. Their transaction costs will go up. Scams will increase because they don't really have a clue how their accounts will get used. So no, corruption will go up and these people will suffer economically in the country. Similarly, with the tax system, a lot of businesses that I know are now going informal because they do not have the capability to cater to an extremely difficult regulations related with the new taxation system. In fact, already the most of the economy is suffering hugely because of demonetization and the new tax system, although the numbers don't really reflect the problems of India right now, mostly because a lot of these numbers that come out of, in terms of statistics, are of the formal economy. A big chunk of Indian economy is informal. So informal economy is dying and the formal economy is benefiting from it slightly. But overall, the country is suffering hugely.
And the hedge fund manager Raoul Pal, who's also the co-founder of Real Vision Television, he's half Indian, and he thinks Aandar, the digital identification system, is good for the poor and the Indian economy. As a libertarian, I disagree. I think consumers should have choice. They should have more freedom. They shouldn't be forced to have digital identification cards, link all their banking accounts to a digital identification, link all of their credit card information. I think not only you're making it dangerous for cybersecurity, you're also potentially making it easier for the government to track and tax every single transaction.
Yeah, I have read what he has written, and Raul is completely wrong in his assertions. What is actually happening, Jason, is that about 95% of Indians have apparently registered for this Aadhaar card. The problem is that my parents, their names on their Aadhaar card is spelled wrongly, and they don't have their fingerprints on that card. So this is the case with my parents. Imagine how many more people suffer from exactly the same problems. Also, when I go to the banks on the first of any month, I see a long lineup of extremely old people lining up to claim a couple of dollars that the government gives them every month. Aadhaar card should have enabled them to get their money into their bank accounts right away. A lot of that money still goes missing, and these people then have to run around trying to get those couple of dollars. And I'm not exaggerating. This is often just a couple of dollars every month. Aadhaar card seems to have done no good to the country. Data is already leaking. Millions of Aadhaar cards are fake Aadhaar cards. And remember, this is a country where maybe 50 to 70% of the population lives in informal houses. They don't really have concrete houses, which means that a lot of these Aadhaar cards will go missing every year. Hundreds of millions of these Aadhaar cards will go missing and will get destroyed. The end result will be that this will be a complete chaos. Remember, this is an extremely poor and wretched country and very uneducated country. They simply do not have the skills and social capabilities to go high tech right now.
And a lot of India still doesn't have electricity, I believe. So there's problems there with infrastructure. I think every year there's arguments that India needs to improve its infrastructure, and for decades, it's never gotten done. I remember reading your articles, Jayant, about how the Indian demonetization scheme was being, screwed up, how the government printed cash and it didn't even fit the size of the ATMs. I don't know if that was intentional or unintentional, just government stupidity, or if it was actually done intentionally or not, and the long lines at the ATM. So it seems like with a lot of these government programs, I know the US is like this as well, but when the government claims to, this government program is going to fix this, it seems to end up creating a lot of more problems than it actually solves, and creates unintended consequences as well.
Well, the real problem of that country is sheer stupidity and sheer irrationalities of the rulers who rule that country. Corruption by itself would only have been a cost associated with living and doing business, and it would have merely transferred wealth from one hand to another. It would not have made a significant negative contribution to the economy. The real problem of India is the sheer stupidity, evil, and irrationalities of the rulers who rule that country.
Do you think the rulers, Jayant, do they still believe in socialism and communism? Because, when Gandhi did implement the revolution in India, he was a peaceful protester, but he also, was anti-capitalist. So it set, I think, his economic policies, and the people who followed immediately after him, the intellectuals who learned in England, basically European socialism, that set India back, decades from their development. Is there still a lot of that in India?
Well, it is far worse than that today, because at least there was a class, there was a culture, there were institutions soon after the British left India. Everything is much worse now. People that the British left in power were at least educated and relatively sane people. Now what you have is true junkies ruling that country. people who have no class, people who have no education, people who are religious fanatics. You look at today's newspaper in India, and one of the headlines is that a Hindu fanatic decapitated a Muslim and then put his body on fire. Fanaticism, because of lack of rule of law, is getting worse and worse by the day in India. And remember, this is exactly what happened in Pakistan. Pakistan is only ahead of India by a couple of decades in terms of fanaticism. Pakistan has grown increasingly worse over the last 70 years, and so has India, except that India has been slow in getting worse, and now it's getting worse very rapidly. So yes, socialism by itself might be not as strong in the country, but there are so many other aspects of life which are much, much worse. Overall, these countries are in a much worse shape than they were after the British left them.
So China has a big credit bubble right now, but you still think that China is in much better long-term shape than India is?
I love China, Jason. I think this is the only emerging market we have on the planet. China was a wretched, poor country 30 years back. Today, it consumes more than 50%, as much as 75% of the world's supply of commodities. When I go to smaller cities in China, I see 3 to 6-story bookshops and containing books written in Chinese or translated from English to Chinese. This is the only country among the third world where I see people picking up reading habits. I can discuss and argue with some Chinese. China is going through a cultural revolution, and I enjoy that China is a better country every time I visit that country. Now, yes, China has credit bubble, China has many other problems, but remember, the very fact that we now compare China with the US or the Western countries mean how much further China has grown in the last 30 years from an extremely tyrannical communist country.
Yeah, I don't think you can really call China an emerging market anymore at this stage. I think they're a more developed economy, and yeah, they have credit bubbles, but they also have a very, very long history of entrepreneurship. So if you kind of take out those years with Chairman Mao for the decades where China, was a huge basket case and there was, work camps and things like that. Before that and after that, China has been working hard, has a history of capitalism. They actually invented the printing press before Gutenberg. So, here in the West, you think that Gutenberg invented the printing press. I think he actually won lawsuits over other printers of the printing press, but the Chinese had actually been using a printing press for a lot longer than anyone in the West had, long before Gutenberg.
Absolutely, Jason. And also remember, we all blame China for copying Western technology. If copying technology were all that easy, Latin America, Africa would have been much more rich as well. Copying is not an easy art. Moreover, a lot of high technology instruments coming out of China these days meet the German and Japanese standards. So China is going through a revolution. China is truly changing, and China is improving and continues to improve. So yes, despite the credit bubble, despite many of the problems that China still faces, including problems of pollution, every time I go to China, I go to China maybe once or twice a year, I see things improving in China, whereas that isn't necessarily the case in the rest of the world.
And Chinese students are also kicking regular American students' butts in high school, university levels for math and science. So science, technology, engineering, math. A lot of American students are, especially nowadays, they're snowflakes, they're social justice warriors, they're getting liberal arts education. They want to avoid science and math, and the Chinese students are doing superbly at it. So China is probably going to be the future of a lot of technology companies. Plus, the Chinese government's protecting a lot of the Chinese technology technology companies there, so they kind of have like an insulation there, devoid from like American and European technology company competition inside China.
That's true. And in university admissions in the US, they actually have negative affirmative policy in terms of accepting Chinese students. They discourage, they do not accept Chinese students, because were they to accept students mainly on the basis of merit, a vast majority of students would be East Asian. So yes, these are the people who are taking over the world in terms of high technology. And I am currently in Los Angeles, and I went to a high technology artificial intelligence conference that is currently happening in Long Beach here. I think at least 30 to 50%, or probably even higher number of people in the audience there is Chinese or East Asian.
That's very interesting. The common theory right now is that Chinese are only good at copying, like you said, but you know they have a long history of entrepreneurship, and yes, for decades they didn't do that, but I think they're gonna get back to inventing and being entrepreneurs. And so yes, I think they have a lot of patents right now, and they maybe have not invented a lot of stuff yet, but you know they've laid the groundwork. So they have the students with the PhDs in math and science to start, and they've started innovating because they have patents. So eventually those products are going to start coming forth in the decades ahead that in the past, you know, the United States would have invented.
Among the third world countries and so-called emerging markets, in my view, there's only one country whose students actually think about returning back to their home country, and that is Chinese. Most other people from Africa or from South Asia stay back in the US after their education if they can stay back, whereas a part of Chinese students actually return back to China because they want to go back to China and start and work for some of the best companies in the world today. Some of the highest market capitalization companies in high tech or in other industries are now in China, Alibaba and a lot of other high tech companies. And these Chinese students look forward to working for these kind of companies.
I want to transition a little bit. How did you find the Austrian School of Economics? Is it common in India to study this?
Jason, I grew up in an environment of stupidity. As a child, I did not believe what I was experiencing in the society I grew up in. It was non-stop stupidities. Austrian economics is nothing but rational economics. Libertarianism is nothing but rationality. And as a baby, as a child, I knew there was something completely wrong about the society I was growing up in. It took me many decades to put a label on it, label of libertarianism and label of Austrian economics. But this is what I have always believed in.
That's very interesting. I want to talk about Japan now. Now, you've been to Japan. You have a unique view on Japan. How's your view on Japan different from other people's views on Japan?
So a lot of people believe that Japan is on a suicidal path. Japan is getting worse by the day, according to the international media. In my view, Japan is probably the best country in the world. Not only it's the best country in the world, it continues to improve, and it has preserved the good aspects of Japanese culture and Japanese society. For example, you will often read in the international media that Japanese GDP is stagnating, which is very true. What you then have to look into is that Japanese population is actually falling, which means that on per working person basis, Japanese GDP is actually more healthy than that of the USA. It continues to increase, but the media will ignore this. The media will tell you that Japan, a lot of Japanese are staying virgin. And they will mention a figure, something like 30% of Japanese within the age range of 18 to 40 are still virgin. Now, reality is, Jason, for a 18-year-old person to be a virgin is nothing unusual and not necessarily a bad thing. Moreover, what they don't want to account for is the fact that 86% of Japanese actually end up getting married. The society looks down on single motherhood. And the reality is that single motherhood hasn't really done a lot of societies much good. Look at single motherhood in Africa or in Latin America and increasingly in the Western societies. It hasn't added to goodness of these societies. Japan has preserved some of the good aspects of Japanese society, but at the same time, they have preserved and incorporated within their societies the best aspects of the Western societies. They're also a society that is not allowing migrants to enter Japan. So international media will make fun of Japan because Japan is refusing to let Syrians and Iraqis or Afghanis enter Japan. And in my view, they are doing exactly what they should do. Multi-ethnic societies haven't really worked out anywhere in the world. So Japan, as a result, is actually virtually a crime-free country. There is virtually no crime in that country. A young girl can go around anywhere in the country late into the night, including walk around the red light district, and it is not a problem for her. That is what Japan has produced, and one should be proud that this is a society that is preserving what is probably the best humanity has created.
Yeah, you can't say that about the crime now in the United States and Western Europe. It's gone out of control. What the mainstream media would say, you have some politically incorrect views, but I agree with you on a lot of the points you made. I actually have a couple friends who aren't Japanese who moved to Japan to live there, and they've told me some of the stuff about what's going on in their society. They have so much new technology, and I'm not sure if the GDP fully captures that, but basically, if you buy a house, I guess, outside of Tokyo in a non-major city, they basically just bulldoze the house and they completely rebuild it, and there's all brand new appliances and technology there, which is basically the opposite of a lot of houses in the US, which basically, are only slightly remodeled every 10, 15, 20 years or so.
This country, Japan, was virtually destroyed in the Second World War, Jason. It's a new country in many ways. You see new structures everywhere in that country. It's a densely populated country. These are very proud people. I visited the area where the Fukushima earthquake disasters epicenter was. And these people within months had cleaned up the area. There were no riots. There was no robbery. These are proud people. They don't accept victimization. And in fact, ask a Japanese what they think about what the US did to them in the Second World War, and they will actually not even know how to respond because they don't feel victimized. Proud people don't feel victimized. They move on.
That's very interesting. How about Japanese and robots? So did you see a lot when you go to Japan? Do you see robots prevalent everywhere?
Not necessarily. You, of course, see an extremely clean society, a society where people do immaculate work, immaculate job of everything that they do. I have never seen anything running late. I have never seen anything presented badly. They have in their soul, they have goodness. They have a very high level of work ethics. That is what Japan has today. What is very interesting is that there is indeed one big problem that Japan faces, and that is actually a problem of success. And the problem is that Japanese refuse to die. They have a healthy lifestyle. They end up living much longer, and humanity still has to work out what to do with old people who way outlive their productive years. So that is a good problem to have, and not only Japanese, particularly Japanese, because it's a problem of success, but the world has to figure out what to do and how to deal with increasingly old people who have outlived their productive years.
Well, I've actually seen articles about this, Giant, and it looks like the Japanese are testing like these robots with bare faces that are full like nurse healthcare robots. So they're working on having fully robotic, fully automated with very few human beings there to take care of the older Japanese people.
That's true. And I keep hearing about increasing use of robots in every space of Japanese life. In fact, robots are apparently increasing at such a huge pace in Japan that they are making up for shortages in available people to work in that country. Unemployment rate is extremely low in Japan. Companies I met told me that they are finding it virtually impossible to find people to work in their companies. So as a young person in Japan, you don't have a problem of unemployment. You get a job right away if you're willing to work.
It's very good. It's kind of the opposite of here in the United States now for a lot of different industries. But yeah, I really like Japanese culture, a lot of it. When I do go to Japan, I haven't been there yet. I would really like to ride one of those maglev or bullet trains. Did you get the chance to ride those?
I do it all the time. Whenever I go to Japan, I buy a 7-day rail pass. And Jason, it is truly worth it. Buy a 7-day, 14-day, or 21-day rail pass and travel around Japan for minimal amount of money. Japan was not a destination for tourists until about a few years back. The reason was that Japan was an extremely rich and expensive place to go to. But yen has fallen quite a bit over the last few years. That has meant that visiting Japan has become much cheaper, much less expensive, and Japanese are encouraging people to come and visit Japan, and they are offering this very, very cheap rail pass, which allows you to travel for free as much as you want within the country for the duration of the train pass.
Very interesting. Now, I want to transition to your insights on the Vancouver junior mining sector, since I know you've lived and worked in Vancouver for a while. That's one of your main bases. So we've had the price of Bitcoin just basically go parabolic. The other cryptocurrencies have gone like crazy. The price of gold, let me pull up my Kitco chart website real quick. We have gold at 1,246 approximately, and silver under $16 at $15.68. So do you think then that the Bitcoin and the higher cryptocurrency prices has taken a lot of capital away from precious metal juniors and some of the other commodity players?
Absolutely, Jason. If you add up all the market capitalization of all the cryptocurrencies, it comes to around $500 billion. And that is as much money as what the whole of the gold industry would have produced in the last 5 years in terms of gold. So the reality is that a lot of people who would have invested in gold have now moved to cryptocurrencies. So yes, indeed, cryptocurrencies have taken over a big chunk of who would have been buyers of gold and silver.
And we're also starting to see some of these more, let's say, immoral stock promoters in Vancouver change the names of their companies to either add cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. They don't have a business plan to that. And so, they just changed their name, and the stock prices are moving up to catch the crypto trend, even though they haven't actually changed their businesses away.
Yes, I know some companies which were high-tech companies in the late 90s. Then they became mining companies, and now they have become cryptocurrency companies. And some of them have become marijuana companies. People have to learn to avoid investing in such companies. But also, Jason, let me add a quick thought to cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are not backed by anything real. That doesn't mean I have anything much against cryptocurrencies. I'm truly pleased that Bitcoin has done so well. It has challenged fiat currency market. And I truly enjoy that aspect of cryptocurrencies. But people still have to be aware of the fact that cryptocurrencies don't have any backing whatsoever.
Yeah, and we have a dangerous time now because people don't see the downside in prices for any of these cryptocurrencies, really. So what some of my listeners on this podcast have been saying in the comment section of my videos now, they've liquidated a lot of their other positions, whether that's stocks or physical gold and silver or their mining shares, and now they're chasing Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies higher, trying to get rich quickly. So that's always very dangerous.
Well, if they are saying that, that truly means that you should sell your Bitcoin and move your money elsewhere.
Maybe. I mean, just because it's a bubble, Jayant, doesn't mean it's going to collapse immediately. So, the technology bubble didn't collapse immediately. I think, trying to time exactly when these things are going to collapse is a fool's game. So, I'm participating in these cryptocurrencies, but I haven't sold any of my physical gold or silver to do it. My largest, investment is still Sandstorm Gold, which is taking advantage of this bear market in gold and silver companies and is buying, royalties on really quality geology prospects for very, very cheap.
That's correct, Jason. I would certainly not sell other assets that I own to buy cryptocurrencies right now. But again, I am respectful of the fact that there are a bunch of people who are challenging the fiat currency market, including, of course, people who have invested in gold and silver.
Now, at the current gold and silver prices, we've had basically a paper bear market since 2011. There were signs that the bull market had maybe restarted in late 2015, early 2016, and then the restart of the bull market, just gave out, and silver's basically been stuck. Gold has risen a little bit off those lows, but silver has basically been totally in the mud. It didn't even rally with the other base metals like copper, lead, and zinc that have been on fire lately. So do you think these juniors are only a very small percentage able to raise capital? What are you hearing from Vancouver?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult for these junior mining companies to raise money, but for quite correct reasons, because a lot of these, and actually a majority of these junior mining companies, and in fact mining companies as well, have destroyed wealth in the past. They are, as a group, wealth destructive sector. So you have to be very analytical when you invest in these mining and junior mining companies and invest for value rather than to follow the herd.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, the longer this bear market starts, Jayant, I think the larger precious metals, royalty and streaming companies, your Franco-Nevadas, your Wheaton Precious Metals, your Royal Golds, your Cisco Gold Royalties, and your Sandstorm Golds, they have capital, they have clean balance sheets. They're going to be able to do deals in this environment because no one else has capital. They're going to be either be able to finance potential new mines that might be economic at these levels, or they're going to be able to clean up, currently producing miners' balance sheets. So they're going to be able to take advantage because a lot of these, regular mining companies, you'd think that they would want to be contrarians and make investments during a bear market, but they don't have the good balance sheets to be counter-cyclical.
That is correct. And that is there are two issues related with that. Today, gold mining companies continue to be loss-making. A lot of them are loss-making, which means that gold price really has to go up quite a bit for these companies to continue to mine or to continue to put new projects into production. So that makes me very optimistic about the future of gold price, despite that gold price has suffered in the last few weeks. But I think a lot of that is a result of increasing price of Bitcoin. Also, there are indeed a lot of exploration companies that are very cheap because people have removed their money from those companies. Some of the people with cash and people who understand these projects, the good junior mining companies, those people who have the cash and the capabilities to understand these companies will be investing in these companies and will position themselves for a very good upside.
Now, you make money in the resource sector with price arbitrage. Can you explain to our listeners how you do that and maybe give a past case study or example of a trade that you did that worked out well?
So there are always about 3 or 4 merger arbitrages available in the market. It's a good, safe way to make money in the market. And to give you an example, Jason, when you drive down on a street, you will see gas prices that are about as much as 20 to 30% different between different gas stations within a city. I'm in Los Angeles and I can see $3 per gallon gas here, and I can also see $3.70 per gallon gas here. There's such a huge difference in what is the most liquid commodity in the world. You can then imagine what might be happening in junior mining sector, which is probably the most illiquid sector in the industry. The end result is that there is usually a huge differential between value and price of these companies. In fact, you can see a huge differential existing when a merger starts to happen between these companies. And I have often seen a merger arbitrage of between 20 to 50% in these companies when they merge. For example, in 2015, a company came out with an extremely simple news release. The company was Sunridge Gold, and the news release said that every share of Sunridge Gold would be converted into 38 cents Canadian as a result of a merger that they had signed on, 38 cent Canadian. Now, this is the simplest news release possible. The share price when the market opened that day was 24 cents, which meant that if you bought shares of Sunridge Gold that day, you would have positioned yourself to make about 60% in arbitrage, 60%, 60. Now, the situation is that this situation continued to exist not just that day or for the next few days, it continued to exist for the next 4 months. This is the reality I have seen again and again. The market takes a very long time to appreciate the value of a company or a value of a merger that is in progress. The arbitrage or the value to price differential continues to exist for months and sometimes for years. So these companies can offer you an opportunity to slowly buy their shares and position yourself to make a lot of money.
So in order to get that 60%, you would have had to buy the shares at, 24 cents, and then you would have had to hold the shares through until the actual merger or acquisition actually went through, right?
Yeah, and that took about 6 months. So in 6 months, you would have made 60% of your investment, 60%. Now, that's a very safe and very exciting upside for me.
Now, why do you think more people don't do that? Do you think then the reason the stock price wasn't higher and pricing in, the full value of that deal was because the market thought that maybe, the deal would collapse, the deal would fall through, or that there would be a different bid or something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, market is always suspicious about everything that happens until the time that groupthink kicks in. But by the time groupthink kicks in, the arbitrage is mostly gone. So I'm prepared to take a position before groupthink kicks in, before everyone is interested in buying something. Now, what happens, Jason, is that maybe 1 out of 10 such opportunities end up making you lose money. But if I can make 60%, 30 to 60% in 9 opportunities, and if I lose money or break even in the 10th one, I don't really regret it.
That's a good point. Yeah, and Warren Buffett said, most people on Wall Street who are considered good money managers who have very high-paying jobs, they're only good at picking 3 out of 10 winning stocks. And if you're really good, maybe you're 4 out of 10. If you're a star hedge fund manager, maybe you're a little bit above 4 out of 10. So, to get 9 out of 10 like that, it's pretty darn good.
Well, of course, a lot of other things can go wrong, Jason, because the company that is acquiring might lose its share price during the time that a merger is happening. So none of this means that you don't analyze these companies. You are not savvy when you invest in these companies. You should analyze and thoroughly study these companies before you invest money. A majority of investors will lose their money in junior mining stocks, but anyone who does his due diligence properly, will not only position himself to make money from this value and price differential, he will also position himself to make money from stupidities of other investors.
Wasn't it Benjamin Graham who initially came up with this merger arbitrage? Didn't he go long the company being acquired and short the company that was doing the acquisition?
He might have, and I have to say a lot of my thought process is a result of what I have read of Benjamin Graham, The Intelligent Investors, and remind me of the second book that they wrote.
Security analysis?
Security analysis,
the
yes.
Textbook that Buffett
it's a thick,
he might have wrote it.
Yeah, it's a thick book, and it's a truly good book to read for every investor. Value investing, in my view, is the only way to invest, and these guys have explained what value investing is in their two books.
Yeah, I've read the shorter versions of Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham. I haven't read Security Analysis yet because that's a textbook, but I have friends who try to get through that. It's kind of dense, so you need quite a while. It's about the level of density of human action, I think.
That is probably correct, but truly worth it as well.
Well, Jayant, I really enjoyed our discussion. You have great insights with your travels, and you definitely have unique opinions on India and many of the emerging markets, because I don't think we're getting a lot of the opinions that you're coming out with from the mainstream financial media. I think it's basically that, India is going to kick China's butt, blah, 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 blah.
Well, Jason, the reason behind it is very simple. The problem is that in today's institutional environment, if anyone tells you that these third world countries will not do well, is immediately branded as a racist. And these people are kicked out of such companies. Now, if you worked in the international media, or if you worked in the World Bank or IMF, would you want to say within your institutional meetings that, listen, there's an inherent problem in India or in Pakistan or in Africa? The likelihood is that if you said that, you would be kicked out of these organizations. So these are very politically correct people. And the end result is that they cannot see the problems of these third world countries. And yes, these third world countries have huge problems that the world is completely ignoring.
Do you think it's likely then that the next global financial crisis will probably start in the emerging markets and then spread to, like, say, European banks or elsewhere?
Well, these third world countries are nobodies really in terms of their economies. So financial crisis is not my real issue. My real issue is humanitarian crisis. These countries will face a huge number of problems going forward. And remember, millions of people are interested in moving to Europe from these third world countries. And if these countries continue to collapse, and that's what's happening in Venezuela, increasingly in Brazil, you see the same happening in Libya and Egypt, Syria and Iraq are still in huge trouble. The world sees these countries as isolated problems. The reality is that they are symptoms of exactly the same problems happening in the rest of the third world countries, and more and more of these problems will happening in, let's say, South Africa or Zimbabwe, rest of Africa. India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are exactly on the same path. Myanmar is falling apart again. Thailand is more repressive than it has ever been in the past. Malaysia and Indonesia are becoming increasingly fanatic. Turkey has become very fanatic over the last few years. So when you pay closer attention, you see that these third world countries are increasingly facing worse and worse problems, and the real problem will be humanitarian. And when tens or hundreds of millions of these people will want to move to Australia or America, that is really the big risk facing the Western world in the future.
That's very interesting. And yeah, Western Europe specifically has had a huge immigration problem, I want to say the last 5 to 7 years, that I have friends who went to Europe and they tell me, they've been to Europe, Western Europe a number of times, and they tell me how much different Paris is, how much different London and England is, and how much different, so many Germany and Sweden, so many of these other countries have changed so quickly in terms of culture, crime, other things.
Well, I was in Malmo recently last year, Jason, and I had to take a police escort to visit the no-go zones in Sweden. Now, Sweden was a country 20 years back that I visited, and those days you could pretty much go anywhere at any time of the day, and you would have felt completely safe. Now, they have hundreds of no-go zones in Europe today. And the reality is that most of these migrants will never assimilate, and they actually have no respect for Western culture. And Western people simply don't understand this problem. Assimilation actually is negative, as in the next generation, not positive. So the new immigrants at least have some gratitude. Their children will have even less gratitude for the Western civilization. So too much migration will destroy the Western civilization, in my view.
It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward, but I really enjoy your articles, Jayant. They're very thought-provoking, especially on India, because that was the exact opposite of what we're hearing in the mainstream financial media. I want to thank you again for your time today. If our listeners want to follow more of your work, how do they do so?
I have a website, Jason, www.jayantbhandari.com, and everything I do and write is on my website.
Great. Well, I want to thank you again for your time today, and I enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully in the near future we can have you back on.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. Since the middle of 2016, YouTube continues to increasingly censor and sabotage the growth and success of my channel with dramatically slower or no subscriber growth, a huge decrease in views per month compared to 2016, and well over $10,000 lost in Google AdSense revenues the last 18 months. I should have been way over 20,000 subscribers and way over 3 million views last year, but it feels like I am Sisyphus trying to roll a heavier boulder with more and more additional weight up a steeper and steeper hill. In the last few weeks, all of my videos have been set to demonetization by default, and I have to manually protest each video. This is in addition to even lower than usual Google AdSense revenues after the adpocalypse started over a year ago for me. This has also affected my ability to get paid advertisers to agree to deals not involving YouTube, as I lost $3,000 per month in paid advertising deals at the end of June 2017 because all my analytics are down a lot thanks to YouTube censorship algorithms that have intentionally kneecapped the growth of my channel. With YouTube/Google/Alphabet/Don't Be Evil strongly considering demonetizing or setting all libertarian, conservative, or pro-Trump content to private to prevent any sharing or monetization, it is imperative I have a contingency plan to figure out how to make a living off my content. Each 30 to 40 minute video takes a few hours of my time before it's released to the public. There's a strong possibility that in the near future, YouTube will force me to move all or almost all my content to a new video upload website that allows free speech or behind a paywall on my own website. Thanks if you have already made a one-time or recurring monthly donation, and thanks in advance for any future donations as I decide the future of my channel and what to do with my content going forward. We accept one-time donations on the Wall Street for Main Street website via PayPal, Bitcoin, or Gold Money. You can also become a monthly Patreon contributor for $1 or more a month if you want to help me out. And don't forget to like each video on YouTube and share it with your friends and family if you think they would like the content.